People will criticize you for that. Like, oh, well, you flip-flopped, like you changed your viewpoint. But if you haven't learned anything, you don't change your viewpoint, what are you doing?
Today, my guest is Jack Donovan, author of The Way of Men and Fire in the Dark. It's been 10 years since The Way of Men came out. What do you think has been significant changes that you've noticed since then?
I don't know about significant changes. I set out with writing The Way of Men to write a book about what masculinity is always and forever. So, obviously the landscape changes depending on what country you're in, what religion they're, what time period you're in. But The Way of Men was really about primal masculinity and what is related to our evolutionary background. And so not a lot of that has changed at all. But the landscape changes. Obviously, the social landscape has changed a little bit. And unfortunately, I think there are a lot of predictions and things I said about things were happening in society in 2012 that happened. Unfortunately, I wish I was wrong about more things that have changed since and in the way that the world was going and the way that masculinity was kind of threatened and being stigmatized in all different kinds of ways. And there wasn't even a thing that said toxic masculinity in 2012. I don't think that wasn't a word, that wasn't a meme yet. So a lot of things have changed in the social area, but The Way of Men, obviously, I think is a good foundation that a lot of people have gotten a lot from.
For sure. And you talk about as spaces change, where you're living changes, you've moved around a bit. I wonder, what do you look for when you pick a place to settle down and call home?
To stay now, a lot of men have this fantasy that they're going to move out in the woods and chop wood, and it's a thing. Especially a lot of guys want to move out in the woods and they chop wood, but what are you going to do out there? Once you're done chopping wood and looking at a couple sunsets, men need to be around other men to become better, which is a big theme in The Way of Men. And so, who's going to push you? Who's going to be around you? Who are you going to compete with? You're just going to stare at the sun and chop wood. You're not going to get better. Even Henry Thoreau, I think, only lived in the woods for like 2 years. It's so. When you move out in the woods in the middle of nowhere, you're not growing a lot. And so I lived in the country for a little bit, but I'm at a point in my life where I want to keep growing and challenging myself and meeting people who can are moving up in the world, and so I can move up too and be around them. And so I need that. As much as it sounds cool to I'm just going to go out in the mountains and live by myself. I want to be around a place where there has to be somewhere. Where can I train jiu-jitsu? I actually picked the place I live right now because it was close to the gym that I wanted to train at. That's exactly what I was looking for, because a lot of men have they don't have a lot of areas that they can make friends with other men in adult life. They make friends at work and through their family or their spouse or whatever, but it's difficult because a really good male friendship takes a long time. There's a lot of trust that has to be built. My best friend that I've had for many years, I talk to him once every 3 or 4 months, but we worked for 9 hours a day together in a truck for years. So we know each other. And that kind of male friendship is like that. And so it takes a long time to build that up. And jiu-jitsu is one of those good ways. A guy differently when he's tried to strangle you than if you just have had a polite conversation. Something different about him. And so because I'm self-employed, I don't have to go and talk to anybody. So I picked a place near a jiu-jitsu gym, so I'm going to go and interact with those guys, and I'll have that interaction. Otherwise, I'm just talking to supermarket tellers and so forth. So I think so being around other men is really important.
How do you pick the men that you choose to associate with and build those sort of deeper relationships and really make friends? It seems this is a problem, that there are more and more men who maybe they grew up without a brother, and so some big phase in life comes and they don't really have a good friend or a brother or somebody to lean on.
Or a lot of times what guys will do is try to maintain the high school friendships. Or college friendships. And those people might want to stay the same. They might live in the same place and never move, which is not bad, because there are a lot of people who are just are happy and they live in the same place. But you need to make sure that they have the same values and are going in the same direction. And so a lot of people will have these old friendships that are just people who kind of want them to stay who they were in high school.
Yeah.
And that's always bad. You should never, if you're still the guy who you were in high school, you're messing up. Like that's a bad thing. So, you want to make sure you're looking at people who are challenging you. I mean, I was even I would say a state where I was pretty satisfied. I'm like, oh, I've done pretty well. I've written some books, and they're pretty successful. And then you start hanging with guys that are like, oh, well, I have a multi-million-dollar company. And I'm like, oh, well, all right. Like, oh, I guess you all have empires. I'm the only one in the room without an empire. I guess I should work on that.
Yeah.
So it's good to constantly be seeking out those friendships of people who are better than you at different things and who are inspiring you, and also have an energy to them. They're excited about something.
Yeah.
Because a lot of guys just get in this kind of like humdrum kind of like way of going through life, and it's really important to be around guys with a lot of energy. Like when I was getting ready for the show here, I got a text from actually Kasky, this rapper that I interviewed, and he just reached out to me because he liked my work. And man, that guy has so much energy. Like I interviewed him, and it was like he was struck by lightning. And he was like, "I am a spear," and it's just a really anytime you can be around that kind of infectious energy, that's really going to be great for you.
He said, "I am a spear."
Yeah, I am a spear. I'm a spear. Like because he was about to go on tour, and he was like getting all pumped up for it, and he was great. He has so much great energy.
That's fun.
So time you can be around someone like that, you're going to be in a better place.
Yeah, what a cool image. Rappers are interesting because they have this verbal fluency that few people have, and like that was a phrase that we used to use in the military. We talk about being the tip of the spear if you're an infantryman or something like that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you're prioritizing the jiu-jitsu gym as the place to do that. You're a man of many skills. In our last discussion, I remember just listing off so many skills that you have and things that you've done along the way. How do you pick where to put your energy now to focus on something like jiu-jitsu?
Well, it's really hard. I mean, I've been training with a bodybuilding coach for the past few months.
Yeah.
So that's not. I spent a lot of time in the gym, many gyms, but you want to have balance. I mean, you can either give your whole life to this one thing and have that be your identity, which is not wrong, because all the people who are really successful at anything have done that.
Yeah.
If you're going to be a professional bodybuilder, you're going to make a lot of sacrifices, and you're going to live a weird life and eat really boring food. But you're probably going to like put some health risks on yourself by doing that. But that's how you get to the top of the mountain. And the same thing with whether you're a guy who goes in like special forces or something. I'm like, well, there's a big risk involved in that, but you get the payoff of doing that thing. If you're any successful person in life, extreme lifters, extreme athletes, they've given themselves this whole thing. And you can do that, or you can be more of a generalist.
Yeah.
I tend to be a little bit more of a generalist, so like enjoy all aspects of things, and then I can talk about a lot of different things and write about a lot of different things. So I have a pretty good idea what bodybuilders do. I've just been trained by them for months and months and months. I know a little bit about jiu-jitsu. I'm not like world-class jiu-jitsu by any means. I'm like a blue belt. But I have that experience, and I did boxing for a while and collect that experience. So I can collect these different experiences and learn things from them. And so it's just a matter of like, well, what do I want to do right now and kind of focus on? It's like I'm always going to go to the gym, but like now I'll probably shift gears and do a little bit more jiu-jitsu for a while. And then, and also your body kind of tells you what you can do as well. Like, oh, my elbow is hurt. I need to stop doing that. So I guess I'm going to do this other thing. So you just keep changing and shifting focus as time goes on.
Yeah. And this jiu-jitsu thing, it has this social element too, this kind of small, intimate group, or maybe even just pairing off. How do you choose when to do something with a few people? And there seems so many things in society now that seem so big and broad, part of so many big institutions. How do you keep coming back to those small groups, those real human relationships?
Well, it's important to have like actual interactions. I mean, you can really only know, that's what Dunbar's number. You can really only know like 120 people in theory. But to actually make really good friendships, that number is a lot smaller. And if you're in a, say, auditorium, you're having some kind of social experience, but you're not actually connecting with anybody. You're having this this madness of crowds experience
Yeah.
where you're all sharing the same emotions, like in a movie theater or a stadium or
Yeah.
whatever. But if you're having an actual exchange with somebody, if I'm having a conversation one-on-one with you,
Yeah.
that's different
Yeah.
from having that stadium experience.
Yeah.
So like jiu-jitsu is just one thing. I mean, there are many things,
Mhm.
but any of these things where people get in groups and actually have to interact on a one-to-one level and compete in some way. CrossFit is big that way, just because there's a few people and they're doing the same thing all the time, and they know that guy again. This is what he did last week. You build this kind of relationship in history, and the same thing with jiu-jitsu, same thing with any kind of MMA or fighting sport. When you get into things that are more like bodybuilding or something, they become a little bit more solitary,
Mhm.
and you're just kind of by yourself all the time.
Mhm.
So I tend to seek out things where I can actually connect with people a little bit more, because it's like I said, it's important as a grown man to have that network is really important. That's kind of what the Way of Men is about, and that's a lot of my work is about. And so you have to keep reaching out, because you're not just going to have, oh, I fell down and I woke up and I have like 5 friends. That's not what happens.
Yeah.
You actually have to invest, especially as adult male. You have to like set aside time,
Mhm.
because there'll be all kinds of other demands on your time.
Yeah.
Whether it's it's work or family or whatever. But if you invest in all those and don't have any male friends, you end up at a real loss.
Mhm.
I think, and it shows in actually all those other relationships too.
Yeah.
Because you're also desperate at that point. Like my whole identity is my wife, or my whole identity is my kids, or my whole identity is my job,
Mhm.
and you don't have any identity as a man outside of that. So having that male group of friends, well, if one of those pieces falls out, you still have this group of friends.
Mhm.
And so I think that's really important. A lot of men just don't have that, and so they feel lost and a little desperate.
Yeah. And you mentioned Dunbar's number, and a theme that I was picking up on in The Way of Men is that society is losing track of that things are getting bigger, that we're spending more time on the internet. How do we navigate that, as it seems more and more things are pushed out to Zoom meetings rather than shaking hands with people?
Yeah, and that's something that's changed since The Way of Men came out. I mean, obviously
Okay.
the Zoom meeting thing wasn't a thing in 2012.
Yeah.
And now that's how a lot of people are interacting, that they
Mhm.
might go for weeks and just be doing Zoom meetings with
Yeah.
people. But what that's done, I think, you can go through life that way, in the same way that you can just play video games and just look at porn, and just that you
Mhm.
could sit in your room and actually have, that you can be in the metaverse and just have a completely virtual experience. But the fact that those things exist also puts a premium then on actual human interaction. So I think there is probably a new wave of guys who are actually going to check out. They will travel.
Mhm.
Like, they will travel to meet face to face and do in-person things, because their whole life is a Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
So it's changed the landscape in that way. Like, you have to make the effort to have that in-person interaction, and it's so much different because people are so much different in person.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get a kind of feel for somebody who somebody is over a Zoom meeting, but who they actually are in person can sometimes be very different.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes that can be better, or sometimes it can be worse.
Mhm.
So to really know somebody, I think you do have to have that in-person interaction.
Yeah. And for you, to me, you're an example of that. I had seen media that you'd done, and you're very serious and you have a lot to say.
Mhm.
But then meeting you at a gym, it was like, oh, you're funny. You
Yeah,
can be
no one
lighthearted
knows
too.
that I'm funny. Yeah,
You have this other dimension.
Yeah.
How do you choose to present yourself then in this digital space?
I think it's a war to stay dignified.
Mm.
The whole world wants you to do a TikTok dance.
Yeah.
That's what you get rewarded for
Yeah.
the most.
Yeah.
Let me do a dance on TikTok and act silly, and then like it'll be giggly and stupid, and everybody will love it. But that's not, I think, the men that we look up to. I'm very much an idealist in terms of like, what's the best version of a man who you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Would George Washington do a TikTok dance? Probably not. I'm going to say no. I can't ask him, but no. Like, what kind of man do you want to be? And I think that if you use that as a guide point, that's why I think ideals are so important.
Mm-hmm.
Is if you use those as your guides, I'm like, well, how would that guy who I want to be like behave?
Yeah.
And in the same way that I don't want to be in snatchy little arguments on Twitter.
Yeah.
And just sniping at people and being, like, oh, someone's bigger than me, so I have to try and take them down so I can get myself attention.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what rewards you in modern life.
Yeah.
But I think, I personally want to, be able to like myself.
Mm-hmm.
And also, that's not how my ideal version of myself would behave. So it's really keeping an eye on what you would really like to be versus what the world wants you to be, and kind of balancing those, because you got to give a little and take a little. It's if you're marketing something or whatever, it's like you got to give the people what they want a little bit.
Yeah.
But if you're sacrificing your integrity at a certain point, how do you want to be remembered?
Mm-hmm.
You have to think about that.
Right. Yeah, I heard a really nerdy game theory discussion about this,
Mm-hmm.
and how basically at the top level, everyone's incentivized to kind of bring themselves down a little bit to get a little more attention,
Mm-hmm.
but then it all balances out. And at the end, it's a losing game for everyone. If we all degrade ourselves, and it's just a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
So to resist that is the challenge, I think, to keep all of us on a higher level.
Yeah, yeah, and your audience might be smaller
Mm-hmm.
because of that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's that theory. If you have like a band, and if you have 1,000 people who really like what
Yeah.
you do and really get it, then you're doing pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
For other people, it might be more like 10,000, but
Mm-hmm.
that's also very good. If you're trying to get that million, whatever, you're going to have to sell yourself out a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
probably.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd much rather have the guys who really get it and be able to be who I want to be, rather than have to be somebody else to please a whole bunch of people who I don't even like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this kind of gets to your ideas from Fire in the Dark a little bit, talking about having ideals. Right. How do you pick the ideals that you aim for? Is it tightly linked to the masculine virtues, the tactical virtues in Way of Men, or is it a different frame?
Well, the tactical virtues, I get all kinds of readers from the Way of Men.
Yeah.
I get everyone from guys who have literally never thought about masculinity before in their life, and they've never lifted a weight or been punched or done anything.
Yeah.
And they read that, and I'm like, wow, I need to do some things.
Mm-hmm.
All the way to guys who have already, have a body count in wars, and
Mm-hmm.
they've already done that thing, and they're like, no, that's correct.
Mm-hmm.
So I get the range of that. So some guys need to go do that thing,
Mm-hmm.
and some other guys lead something else. So the Way of Men and the tactical virtues are very much, I think, the primal virtues of masculinity, because they're related to our original job as men.
Mm-hmm.
Like what men have always had to do. Go into a space, make sure it's safe, deal with any threats that might have it, conquer any chaos,
Mm-hmm.
and order the space,
And for those who aren't familiar,
Right.
just the tactical virtues are
Sure.
strength, courage, mastery, and honor.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Strength, courage, mastery, and honor. And I just kind of picked those after looking about, what's always true in masculinity is what I was really looking for with the Way of Men. What always and everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Always and everywhere, strength is associated with masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
There's no culture in history when they're like, oh, the weakest man, he is definitely the most masculine man in the room. Same thing like courage. The coward. He is the one who we will lift up as the most masculine man. No, no one ever does that.
Right.
So what's been consistent throughout history? So I think that comes from our role of judging each other as men. Like, hey, can we go out and trust this guy? We might have to kill an aurochs today, or we might have to, another tribe is coming to fight us.
Mm-hmm.
Can I trust you, or are you going to run away?
Mm.
Or are you going to be there for me? Do you care about what I think of you?
Mm-hmm.
So are you good at anything?
Yeah.
So those are the 4 tactical virtues that I picked for that reason.
Yeah.
Because I think that they've been consistently true throughout history. Those things are always important to men on our evolutionary level.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not they're important to society at this moment, on this street, is a different, discussion. But in our primal brains, in the way that we like sex, even though we don't actually plan to reproduce, there's still things that we want to do that don't really necessarily make any sense.
Yeah.
And so masculinity, the core principles of masculinity are very much like that. But as far as choosing ideals, for Fire in the Dark, I really looked at what are the ideals. The ideals that come from the Way of Men are attached to the striker archetype.
Okay.
That is always that's the warrior archetype. But that is one piece of being a man. That's not the whole thing. So I also in Fire of the Dark I talked about 3 main archetypes that we see over and over again throughout history. So it's the father, the striker, and the lord of the earth. It's like in every mythological system you have a sky father of some kind, and he makes rules and like separates things and creates order, and then the striker kind of defends that order, and then everything that really happens for most of the time aside from that, because you don't need to defend it every day, you don't need to be making laws and rules every day. Most of life is Lord of the Earth stuff. Like just well, we got to harvest the crops and build a building and make some pottery and live life and have a party and do all the things that actually are enjoyable about life. Because not everything is making rules and fighting. So
Thank God.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, well, it's you get guys that are so focused on making rules and fighting, especially the fighting part. They're like, we have to defend the space. Well, what are you even defending? Do you even know what you're defending? What's inside the space? And that's the work of the kind of the Lord of the Earth archetype is really to create culture. What's inside that space that's beautiful, what's worth saving. And so that those are the main ideals that I picked from that historically. And then personally, while I was reading and doing the research for Fire in the Dark, I did read like a biography of George Washington, and just really struck me as someone who just really had really all of those characteristics. I mean, he actually was a farmer, and he was really good at farming, and all loved to dance and drink wine, and had favorite poems, and went to the theater, and all these cultural aspects that people don't see, and was very fastidious about appearances and things like that. But then, also was a warrior who would beat you down. Like he would grab a dude grab dudes and break them up from fights himself. He was a strong leader and obviously heroic like warrior. And then he became really father of a nation in terms of like making rules and how do we want this culture to evolve. And he was very, very active in seeing the long picture and trying to like see what the problems were going to be and doing all this work of this father archetype. So I really thought George Washington is a great way to capture the father, the striker, and the Lord of the Earth, because he has kind of all of them in his character. And it's interesting because he's a conceptual father because he didn't have any kids.
Oh, right.
So he's really just the conceptual father of a nation, and so it really fits really, really well. So it's, like I said, I'd like to ask, I actually have a little band, and my band said, what would George Washington do? Yeah. It's a good thing to think about. Like what would George Washington do? And are you doing that? Probably not. You could do better.
That's a great ideal. Wow.
Yeah. You if you say I want to be a little bit more like George Washington today, you're not going to mess up. It's always going to be better.
Well, oh man, that's awesome. You mentioned that different people find the way of men for different reasons. One venue that I've actually been finding it in lately is I've been doing interviews with people. We talk geopolitics, and I've started to look at people's geopolitics reading lists, and they find the way of men as a crucial work of philosophy in understanding how people interact, how that shapes culture, how that shapes nations. What do you think about that?
Well, I agree. I mean, I think the nucleus of a lot of culture is actually men getting together. I actually like to joke that a lot of culture is just comes from jokes. Like if you get men together in a Telegram group, they will create a culture within like weeks. It's amazing. They'll have jokes, and they're like, these are outsiders. They don't understand our jokes anymore. Like they create an us and a them very quickly. And that's the root of it. I mean, because if you think about guys, out in the woods, a few guys get together and they're working together every day. Well, now they've all invested in a thing together, and those people haven't. I mean, it's very fundamental. This idea of this tribal primal gang, kind of centered around a fire and what the perimeter and protecting that perimeter. That's very basic. That's what a military does whenever they go into a space. They're like, we're going to take this space and reduce all the chaos and order the space and then defend the perimeter of it. Right. It's a very fundamental and put in a way that almost anyone can understand it. And I think that's one you can give that someone as an easy read.
Mhm.
Fathers give it to their sons,
Mhm.
and this is how the world works, or at least how men work.
Mhm.
And I think, and I actually have a lot of women who will read The Way of Men and say, now I understand my husband or boyfriend better.
Mm.
I understand why he cares about that and is doing that thing that I don't care about and I'm not doing,
Mhm.
because he's focused on a different area.
Yeah. How does that conversation go? What's that like?
It's rare. I just usually get it from like I'll get like a message or an
Yeah.
email or something like that, or occasionally I'll meet somebody who had their wife read it, and
Mhm.
then they'll be like, I loved it. Like now I understand. Oh, that's what he's doing right now. He's protecting the perimeter, or he's that's why he needs to go out and hang out with other guys. It's
Mhm.
not because he doesn't want to hang out with me, but he needs to go out and have that separate identity so that he can be more confident and be more of himself. So
Mhm.
I think there are women who are just not open to that at all, and then there are women who are like they just want to understand the guy that they're with better.
Yeah.
And so it's always great to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, this is very uplifting to hear, and I wonder. It seems so many men's related movements
Mhm.
seem to descend, seem to get into sort of a dark and nihilistic kind
Yeah.
of hopeless place. What is the antidote to that? What can keep men from falling into that?
Well, I mean, you look at what's happening with the world right now, and it is easy to go to take the black pill as they call it,
Mm.
and be like nothing's ever going to get better and get very nihilistic.
Yeah.
And they might be right. I don't know, but that's really no way to live life.
Yeah.
And and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mhm.
If you believe like everything's always going to get worse, congratulations, that's probably what's going to happen. At least for you. So, you know, my the essay that I wrote years ago is called "Stay Solar," and it was while a lot of things were happening in 2020 and whatever,
Yeah.
and where I think it was actually before that, but it became very popular, I think, in that period, and that kind of became part of my philosophy that I call solar idealism, and that the idea of that is basically just to be more focused and more like the sun, be this kind of generating force of light that draws people into your orbit and kind of orders the world in the way the sun does around it. You pull people into your orbit and give them something back, because
Mhm.
there's manipulators who just pull people into the orbit and then suck them dry, and then but the sun like feeds all of us.
Yeah.
And if you look at really successful men, that's what they do. They actually create ecosystems
Mhm.
around them. Like whether it's a successful businessman, well, this whole company will actually depend on him, and then other businesses will then depend on him and whatever, and he'll have this whole kind of mini kingdom.
Yeah.
And that's the way really successful men operate.
Mhm.
So, I obviously want to stay focused on moving in that direction, and promoting that rather than like everything is going to be bad and you should just sit in your apartment and be sad about it.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, because you can't make anything better doing that. So you can't be the answer to the problem. You can only be part of the problem.
Mhm.
And so that's been a big message that I've been pushing for a lot of years, rather than guys who just want to focus on darkness and anger.
Yeah. It seems maybe part of the frustration and where that darkness comes from is that so much of what seems masculine now has been forced into kind of an abstract place where most of us are not out
Sure.
pioneering
Right.
or something like that. So what can we do to embrace these more abstract things or to exercise these tactical virtues in a more abstract world?
Well, it's a more abstract world, but I think it does have to be physical to a
Okay.
certain extent.
Okay.
I mean, because that becomes a slippery slope, and guys who are really intelligent will be like, well, all of my masculinity is metaphorical, and they'll want to.
Mhm.
They're actually just putting things off that are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
A lot of times, they're like, I don't need to do that because I threw it a different way. But that guy probably needs to get punched. He needs to have some kind of interaction that is more visceral.
Yeah.
Because that's the piece that he's missing.
Yeah.
Whereas the guys who've had that all the time, they need to go read a book.
Mhm.
There's a little bit of a balance that needs to happen there.
Mhm.
So I think that for, like I said, for guys who are totally in their heads,
Yeah.
it's really, really helpful for them to go out, and I mean that's what sports are.
Mhm.
Sports are what you do so that men don't kill each other when it's not time for a war.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the
Mm-hmm.
they're doing war things. They're exercising that primal part of their brain that does
Yeah.
hunting and fighting,
Yeah.
but they're not killing each other because there's no reason to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we've always had sports, because you need to give guys something to do because they have the energy, and that's when they feel alive, because that is what they're meant to do to a certain extent. And it's like when you go, you know, I always say this, but like when you see guys spar for the first time, whether it's jiu-jitsu or whether they're like doing boxing or whatever, it's like they're like dogs wagging their tails. You know, when dogs are fighting, they're like I mean, you know, like, but, you know, but that because it's what they're meant to do,
Yeah.
and they love doing it.
Yeah.
And so I think that we need to, you know, men become healthier if they go and do those things, and then they can come back to their abstract world because men have always been both.
Mm-hmm.
Something I've talked about a lot recently is that, you know, there's this idea that as a pushback, you know, like the world is too focused on, you know, intellectual things and culture, so we all have to go be barbarians. And like, you know, I use barbarian in a different way when I use it in my work, but we all have to go, you know, just, you know, hate comfort and hate all things and just be, you know, like tactical, and that's cool too. And you need to do that, you know, you need to do that as well. But men created most of the beautiful things that have existed in the world.
Mm.
You know, men have created most of the paintings and sculptures and beautiful buildings and the ancient monuments that are, you know, still around in the sand and the desert.
Mm-hmm.
It's because men always actually cared about beauty, and they always cared about culture, and they always, you know, men, you know, the oldest poems are men talking about their adventures.
Yeah.
You know, or it's the Iliad, or, you know, like the Epic of Gilgamesh or something like that. The Rig Veda is metal, if you actually read it. Yeah, and you know, so these are things that men have been doing for all history, but they were also like, and then we need the poet to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we need beauty around us, and we need, we could live in a hut, but let's make this awesome building because look at it, it'd be cool.
Yeah.
And men have been doing that for all of history. And so I think we need to not lose sight of, you know, not get so panicked that we don't have the tactical aspect of masculinity, you know, that we're not all hunters and fighters, that we say, I can never go to an art museum or listen to music or do anything creative or read a book.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I just need to be on the range, like firing in case something happens. You know, like it's good to do all those things. Yeah. I mean, masculinity is a we've always done all those things. I mean, if you look at the ideal of like the noble class in Europe, you know, or, you know, a lot of the officer classes in some of the great empires, you know, even, you know, in Asia and all around the world, they, you know, those guys were also extremely well read and, you know, like well versed in poetry. I mean, that's how we get, you know, Kipling from that class, you know, of men who, you know, also know how to recite poetry and kill people.
Sure.
You know, you can do all those things. So I think that a balance is a really important factor.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think of some of the guys I've known who are ferocious. I used to room with a guy who was a United States Marine Corps officer. Yeah. We had a guy down the hall who was a Marine Corps officer. They both were extremely well read. One was an English major, one was a philosophy major with a minor in math. Right. They had a great taste for wine. They had dogs. They traveled. They were rounded, but they were also extremely dangerous at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that's something we lost in America. I don't know when we lost. Like George Washington was much more of that kind of character. Mm-hmm. But, you know, this James Bond ideal that they have much more in England, because I think of the officer class and the empire that it's left over from. Mm-hmm. You know, like James Bond, you know, he knows what Kina Lillet is, but he also, you know, knows how to operate all the guns and all the cars and every other thing. Yeah. He's extremely dangerous. You know, they call it, I think one of the names from it is like a cultured thug. And yeah, a lot of these guys idealize special forces guys or whatever. And if you actually meet those guys, they're actually really smart. Mm-hmm. You know, most of them are actually really smart guys and really well read and maybe speak a few languages and, you know, that know how to order dinner in Germany. And, you know, there's a lot of cultural depth to those guys as well. Yeah. And so I think that people need to avoid being too one-sided.
Mm-hmm. What do you see in culture now that's beautiful? It seems culture in America in particular, I feel like there's been a trend toward things that are angry or ugly. Mm-hmm. What do you see that's beautiful right now? What do you celebrate?
Well, I think you need to look too. I think that people don't look. I mean, there's this joke. Yeah, it's kind of boomerish that everybody's like, I don't like modern art. Well, what do you even know what that is? Like we're talking about like 100 years of art. Like I don't like anything that's been made since like 1900. Nothing beautiful has been made since 1900. Really, that's not true. And the thing is, like, men have been, and I think this is especially the case in America. Men have been like pushed out of that space. I actually wrote about this at one point recently. There's a phenomena from anthropology called like sex pollution. Basically, if in a society where the gender roles aren't very well established, what this author wrote about, and this was from the kind of golden age of social anthropology or cultural anthropology in like the 50s and 60s, and this woman wrote that if in a society, and she was looking at primal societies, in a society where gender roles are not well established, and there's a little bit of flux. Maybe the women have more economic power or whatever, like because they make the thing that the tribe sells or whatever. Men will start, closing off their identity. Like we can't do those things. Once a woman does something, it's polluted, so I can't do it. And I think that what happened in American culture, especially since the 20th century, as women moved into the marketplace and all kinds of occupations, whatever. All these things that were previously all male spaces that men were like, this is my identity, this is who I am. Then women did them, and then men didn't want to do them anymore. Men stopped wanting to do things because women were doing it. You can see this happening in social trends online. If a whole bunch of if something becomes, the thing that your girlfriend does, whether it's like taking pictures of food at the restaurant, then men are like, I don't want to do that. I don't, like they won't do it because girls do it. And that's something that I think we see everywhere. And so I think that happened to the cultural space in many ways in the art world and so forth, that, as women moved into that space, and you see it in publishing and writing especially too, it's a very female dominated industry now. And as women moved into that space, men left and they went to go do other things. And so that became stigmatized. And then what you have is they're like, well, why is our culture so effeminate? Well, it's because it's created by women and men who don't really care about masculinity. And so I think that we have to realize that, well, that's not a problem that's going to go away. Women are here and they're going to do everything that men do. So if you want to be a man and create masculine culture, that's your job. That's not, you can't be like mad, like, well, Hollywood doesn't make enough masculine movies for us. Well, it's your job. Go do it. You have to do what you have to, the cliche would be the change you want to see in the world, create the culture that you want to see in the world. And that's your job. And it's our responsibility to create the kind of culture that we want to see. So I think that that's something that's happened, over the past 20th century and into the 21st century, is that just men have retreated from spaces and into the man cave or whatever. They'll back themselves into this little redoubt of what their identity is, and their identity became very small. There's only like men are allowed to have beards and drink whiskey and smoke cigars and like chop wood and do there's this work on cars, do anything in Home Depot. It's just very small things that are like safely masculine. Like there's no room, like, and a lot of things just that women didn't feel like doing. Like women don't want that space, so you get to have it. And so men have to reclaim some of that space for themselves. Not necessarily like not pushing women out of it, but like if you want to do something, you have to do it and not be afraid. Well, girls do that too. Well, because that's everything. You have to go out and start creating culture again.
So what do you see in culture that you're excited about, or what looks beautiful to you?
Well, AI art just happened like in the past like 6 months. And that's moving a little too fast and getting too good. But I mean, the things that you can do with 3D rendering right now. So much. I mean, people have these Instagram experiences that like they're, they just see people yelling at them or like whatever different things, and all I do is look at art. There's so many people making like amazing 3D art right now, because you can do anything, and these things that only Industrial Light and Magic could do, like in the 1990s. Almost anyone, you just probably need a $5,000 computer, and you can render out an entire environment and put people into it. Like you can do special effects yourself now, or you can create these, basically anything you can imagine. And the same thing with digital art. Having gone to art school, the things you could do with an iPad like now that would have taken like tons and tons of pages of tracing paper, and I have to fix this and erase that and whatever. It's like I can do drawing with 26 layers and just change the colors of things.
Yeah.
And it's we have this creative potential right now, and there are a lot of people making. I don't have like an individual, like one famous artist, but man, even the art that goes in comic books is so high level now. It's not just like a little, a nicer stick figure. I mean, it's really well rendered content, and so there's so many people making art. And even if you look at the history of modern art, I did a little mini documentary for YouTube not too long ago where I went out and visited these earthwork sites.
Yeah.
And it's like it's a very masculine thing to use backhoes to pull like thousands of pounds of stone out of a thing in the desert to make a shape. I'm going to make this shape that's going to be here like after I'm dead, because that guy's not dead yet. Actually, that's Michael Heisner. And he's still building a city out of concrete in the middle of Nevada. And he has been since the 70s. And I would love to see it. That's exciting. If you look at some of the modern sculptors, they might have like a different ideology than I do, but because they live in a different era. They were like someone like Richard Serra. Like you walk into like the museum, and this whole structure that he's built made entirely out of steel. This kind of weaving thing that you have to move through that like is made entirely out of steel. I mean, there's so much potential in all these things. We have all this new technology, all these new exciting things, and it's just all we have to do is take advantage of that.
It seems a theme in what you're highlighting there is things that we can do with greater power, basically new technology, or bigger machines, or the ability to bend metals like this. Would you say that pushing out on those edges of our abilities is what's allowing us to tap into new forms of beauty?
Well, yeah, I mean, men are explorers, so go out into go places farther than we've ever been, or whatever the Star Trek thing is, to where they've never been before.
Yeah.
And so, that's a new boundary. And also, we were always people get hung up on traditional techniques of art, whether it's something like oil painting.
Yeah.
Now, oil painting has a magic to it that is all its own, and you can't really make an oil painting as with Procreate. Like there's something about seeing something in real life that has those layers and that translucent factor that oil paints have that's special.
Yeah.
But oil paint was just the technology they had available at the time. It's not like that's the ultimate form of art. It's just that is a really good form of art. That was the best artist used that at that time. Now it's like, well, why would you paint with lead paint and give yourself lead poisoning and smell like turpentine all day? Why would you do that? They would probably be like, give me an iPad.
Right.
Like Michelangelo would be like, give me that. That's crazy. And what would they create with that? And so we just have, technology gives us so many interesting opportunities of what we could do, because we couldn't do it before.
Yeah.
We just have different angles. And also, I mean, this goes on in a very artistic tangent, but the way photography changed art. A lot of artists were making bread and butter off of doing portrait paintings. Well, you didn't those once the camera was invented, and so I think that was a big factor influencing modern art and how it evolved. Well, we don't need to make everything figurative because we can just take pictures now. So they did, that's influenced art. And what can art be now that we just don't need it to record things? So that whole discussion. I mean, the art world's been having that. It's just been very one-sided in many like ideological ways. But I mean, it's an interesting discussion to have. And what is art? And that's AI changed that recently. Like, well, what is art? If I type in the right series of words and it's a different series than anybody else put in, and then it creates a thing for me, is that art? And that it's questionable. But it's an interesting discussion. That's the kind of discussion that happens in the art world and has been for a long time.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Michelangelo with an iPad. I don't know. Have you ever seen the Sistine Chapel?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I know what the Sistine Chapel is.
I mean, I was there a few years ago, and then somebody was talking about, well, you don't want him painting this.
Yeah,
everything's above him, so the paint's gonna fall on him, and it must have been excruciating in a way.
Total pain.
But what he makes in the end is incredible. But wouldn't it be nice to cut that paint out and to just get back to making?
He would. They would take a projector and they would project on the ceiling, so he wouldn't have to draw it. And he would draw it, on the iPad, and then he would project it on the ceiling, and then he would do it in a different way. I mean, you could imagine how it's the way mural artists work now. A lot of
Oh,
times.
is it?
I mean, not all of them. I can't say what all mural because they all do different things. But if you're going to put a mural on inside a building right now, yeah, you would take a projector and project the sketch onto the wall, and then you would trace it, and then then go from there. Some people freehand stuff like graffiti artists and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean that's how you would do it now. And so yeah, just using that technology in a different way to create what would you create now?
Yeah, with the idea of technology, one thing that I do remember too from the Sistine Chapel is that they would shout at you if you started to pull out your phone. They would go, "No photo," and people put their phone back away.
Yeah.
What is it about capturing things? It seems we're all so into holding our phones up and capturing things. When people are at a concert, everyone holds their phone up now.
Yeah.
I mean, can we get back to that more organic feel, or is that always going to be something?
It's 6 or half a dozen. I mean, as someone who has to make content for a living, like I'm going to do that too.
Yeah.
That's my job.
Yeah.
So it is what it is. But everybody's kind of their own content maker. A lot of times, people complain about it at gyms. Even like all the like 16-year-old kids are in there like filming their workouts for TikTok, whatever.
Right.
And so everybody's doing that. You really can't hate on them for doing the same thing. I'm just in there with like my camera has a monitor. So everybody's doing that on a certain level.
Yeah.
And there is something lost, I guess, in being present in the moment and but I think to really get good at anything, you have to do that too. You don't become really excellent if you're just filming yourself every day. But there is also the aspect, especially with things that are achievement oriented like that. I mean, there's things that I probably wouldn't do unless I have a reason to do it, which is the film. Like, I guess I can go for a squat PR. I don't really need to. I already know how much weight I could lift, but like, I could capture that, and that's the thing.
Yeah.
It's something to do.
Yeah.
I'll climb this mountain because I want to get a picture at the top of it. Like people do that.
Sure.
And so it's getting them out to do things that maybe they wouldn't. They'd just sit at home otherwise.
Yeah.
So it's 6 or half a dozen. It is nice to have experiences where that's not present, but people like to capture the world because they can, and that's it's a thing. Like you don't know, if you would have given an iPhone to someone in ancient Greece, they'd probably be doing the same thing. Like amazing. Showing it. Go, Socrates, have you seen this? Like look at my feed. I mean, the idea that they wouldn't do that is absurd. Because people are still the same animals. Right. You would give them that, and they would. What would they do with it? Yeah. And it probably wouldn't be that different. Yeah. So it is unfortunate when you have that experience of like everyone having to be there and take a picture, and that's a little bit of function of crowds too. There's a million people in space. It's like I probably wouldn't mind it as much if there were only 3 people taking pictures, but you go to Zion Park in the summer. Yeah. And you're going to see a line of people like waiting to get that one shot that everybody has already seen from the internet. So that's unfortunate, but I don't think with the ability, with having supercomputers in our hands, I don't really think that that's going away.
Right. It seems maybe a lot of this is about things that last too, or having some sort of record. Or you talked about the man who uses backhoes to carve out the desert and things like that. What impact do you think an awareness of death and mortality has on these drives in men? Because in your stories too, sometimes there are men who are sort of indifferent to death or indifferent to maybe having their bodies harmed or things like that. Yeah. What role does death, mortality have in the drivers of men?
Well, I always say like, men like this on trees. To let people know that they were there. Yeah. We're like dogs in that way. That's a real thing. Like I want someone to know that I was here. I mean, that's what graffiti is, really. I mean, it's really a lot of times it's people who don't have any other means to express themselves, being like, I was here. Yeah. Yeah, that is graffiti. That's why you write your name on a tree, which you want to punch that person because why do you need to like mess up that rock? But at the same time, someone said that to me. I was out at some petroglyphs the other day in Arizona, and there's Indians doing graffiti. Like the Native Americans out there, like making suns on the rock. Like we don't know why they did it because it's so long ago. No one has a record of it, but like they're marking the world. Yeah. They're really imposing their own reality on the world, and so I think that is something that men have always done, is impose their reality on the world, and that creating monuments, that's a very Ozymandias kind of discussion. Like let's I want someone to know that I was here, and that's a luxury of kings to a certain extent. The bigger you get in the world, the bigger you want your name to be, and your bigger your monument is. I mean, that's why we have pyramids and whatever. Like, I was here,
Yeah.
and yeah. I mean, and there's some people who just don't care. I mean, I know a lot of guys who just don't. That's not a driver for them. But there's definitely a particular kind of guy, and I am that guy, for sure. Like, well, what's my legacy?
Yeah.
Like a legacy-oriented men. So for a lot of guys, their legacy is their children.
Yeah.
And so they'll invest a lot in their children, and that's their version of their legacy. So there's a lot of different ways to do that, but I do think that creating something to show that you existed is a very natural human response. Like a very natural human drive.
Yeah.
And I think we all want to do it. And like I said, that is a specifically male thing in many ways. Like, I want them to know that I was here, and when the other dogs come by, I want them to know that I was here. Yeah. This is my territory. Yeah. It's just part of our, I think, natural. We are animals, and it's part of what we do.
Yeah. You talked about leaving your own legacy. What do you hope your legacy is?
Well, the way of men. It's cool to be at a point in life where, like, I have something.
Yeah.
I do have some kind of legacy. Like, the Way of Men is in not museum, but libraries.
Yeah.
The Way of Men is in libraries all around the world. So
many languages too. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been translated in many languages. So you can pull me off the internet, but like, I'm still in somebody's attic. Like, I'll be there's a paperback copy of something in Germany and Italy and Russia and all kinds of places, Mexico, and that's a pretty cool feeling. To have gotten to the place where I know that's going to outlive me in some way, and that it's had a big impact, because it's not just the physical thing, it's the impact that it's had on people. And so I think I've contributed to discussion of what masculinity is. And I think a lot of people, sometimes whether they know it or not, which is frustrating when they don't know it, but a lot of people, a lot of other writers who write about masculinity have referenced me or taken ideas like the tactical virtues and incorporated it into their work, and then put it in their own direction and put their own spin on it. But I feel like I've been part of that conversation, so I think that's a big part of my legacy. And I think the idea that I have had in Fire in the Dark is good, and I've kind of been working on building that. This idea that as far as religion and mythology and so forth goes, we're at a strange point in history where we can look out over all of history and see, well, that God turned to that God, and that religion turned into that religion, and this is why this happened, and this form of writing then became that form of writing, and that language became that form of language, and humans have never had that in all of history, and I don't see a lot of people talking about that in terms of like, well, what can we do with that? There's, especially as the world becomes more chaotic, there's a lot of people who want to go backwards.
Yeah,
but never in history have you been able to go backwards. You cannot actually go backwards and recreate a past era. That has never happened, and it never will. All you can do is take the history that you see and learn from it and be inspired from it, and then project a better vision into the future. And so I think that's what I'm trying to do in many ways with Fire in the Dark and mythology and so forth. It's like, well, what are these patterns? What have we learned in the past 5,000 years? Yeah. What do we keep doing over and over and over again? And how can we, from this strange high seat where we can see everything, how can we look at that and then put it all back together, and then use that to project forward into the future, rather than trying to go back and become Germanic pagans or ancient Egyptians or like ancient Greek. It's like we can't do any of that, but we can take all those pieces and put them together into something. And I think that's really exciting. And so I hope that becomes another contribution that I have to the great discussion.
Yeah. What do you think all those pieces together is going to look like? What do you think you can do with that?
For me, it's a mythological system that I kind of created on my own, which is in Fire in the Dark, like the Father, the Striker, the Lord of the Earth. It's like, here are these repeating patterns. We don't have to be like, well, that is a god. In the sense of like it's a supernatural being that like is anthropomorphic and real in that way. But if it's something that's been important to men for 5,000 years, it's about as real as anything gets. So let that using that as an ideal, how can we, like looking at that and be like, well, can we revere those ideals and not be foolish and like, well, not have to kid ourselves and pretend that, like that's really talking to me right now, but that idea is talking to you. And so to just reframe that discussion about like what masculine spirituality is, I think that'll be part of my legacy, I hope.
Yeah. So for you, does leaving this legacy, or the sense that you're going to leave this legacy, does that alleviate some sort of death anxiety, or what do you think men can do to grapple with their own mortality?
Well, for sure. I mean, leaving a legacy is how men, grapple with mortality. Whether it's like men, in many ways, they have children. Well, I have kids; they'll survive me. So, like, they'll, unfortunately, usually we don't know our great grandparents' names, so it doesn't really last very long. Most people don't really know that much about their family history.
Yeah.
But they have that sense of pushing something forward into the future. And by doing great things, or whether you build a building. So you're an architect, you build a building. It's going to be around after you die. If you create a great piece of art, or write a novel or whatever. These are things that are going to survive you in some way, and they've impacted the world. And so it does alleviate death anxiety to a certain extent. But yeah,
what do you think? Is there a ritual or a practice or something that maybe in all the cultures you've looked at that comes up that you think could also work for that?
In terms of dealing with death, I think it's just about understanding your place in the world. This like understanding that you're going to die, and trying to do something when you're there. And for me, this is when you talk to really religious people, a lot of times they'll think that, well, if you don't have religion, then you don't have a reason to live. Like there's no reason, like why would you do anything? Why would you do anything good? Why would you do, they think it's pure nihilism on the other side. But I was a non-believer really for at a very young age. And so for me, that was always created exactly what we're talking about is it's kind of like, death anxiety, like I don't know how much time I have, I better do something. This sense of urgency about living. And I think that's really the best thing that you can do to deal with death anxiety is that, well, you can sit in a room and rock back and forth and be like, I'm going to die someday and be scared of it. But like, you're not living then. And so why are you even alive? And so the point is to go out and live life and do something and actually, make an impact in some positive way. And, very few of us will be remembered past a generation. That's just reality. Yeah. But this is also all the time you have. So, you can do something with it, or you can sit and play video games. If you're just sitting and playing video games, why are you there? You're just literally there to like play games and consume. Like successful people always say you should produce more than you consume, and that's I think an important thing to remember. And if you can do that, you're going in a good direction.
Yeah, that's one of the basic ideas of the Way of Men too, is being able to carry your own weight, producing more than you consume.
Absolutely.
In essence, yeah. If you say got bad news from a doctor, you had a month to live.
Yeah.
What do you think you would do?
If I had a month to live, I would probably honestly keep doing what I was doing.
Yeah?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I'd be looking to tie up loose ends.
Okay.
In terms of like, well, I'd be looking at legacy like, well, how is my legacy going to be protected? And things I should probably be doing anyway. Like setting up a trust. Well, how is the Way of Men going to get published? And how is I'd be thinking about stuff like that, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm sure I would also, have a lot of good drinks and eat a lot of good food, but I would be trying to do a lot of the legal things to like protect my legacy and obviously take care of the people around me and all those kind of things. I mean, that's the responsible answer. I think that most men should be doing really at that point.
Yeah, that's sort of the next call. I think after you get the bad news from the doctor is start looking into the lawyer, the family, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're a responsible guy, that's what you do.
Sure. Responsibility is a big word. In the work of the Way of Men, what do you think responsibility boils down to for a man? How can a man be aware of what he's responsible of?
Well, a lot of times, I think the challenge is sometimes the opposite. I found with a lot of guys, um, a lot of people are given responsibilities
Uh-huh.
in life, and then men don't realize that they have to work on themselves.
Mm.
They don't have to, like, oh no, you actually have to work on you. Whether they think they just are there to serve.
Okay.
Like they're serving other people.
Okay.
I've heard that in a discussion that somebody was having with someone they were coaching recently. Like, no one's ever told me to work on myself. I'm just, like, I go to the job, go to my job so I can pay bills, so I can, give food for this person and,
Yeah.
and pay the rent and do all that stuff. And so they're very aware of their responsibilities, but not aware of like, well, are you taking any time to make yourself better or for you?
Mm-hmm.
But as far as, I think, just not being so self-centered that you don't think about what's going to happen to the people around you if you do something. I think being very aware of that they're that's adulthood to a certain extent. Like, well, what am I going to do? And I can't predict everything that's going to happen down the chain from every decision that I make, but to at least have some awareness of what that is. That's what I think as you become more mature as a man, and whether you're a parent or leading an organization or whatever, you're always thinking about like, well, if I make a decision, X, Y, and Z are going to happen. So I need to deal with all those things. And so I think that that's taking responsibility for your actions. I think is a very basic, just things that need to be taught to teenagers.
Yeah.
It's just basic adulthood.
Yeah.
But and then as a man, a lot of times you end up taking on a lot more responsibility. And as you become more successful, you become okay, I'm running a company. I have people who their salaries depend on me and all these other things that then you're responsible for all those things. So men like responsibility. People go out of their way to avoid it.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a juvenile perspective.
Yeah.
Like most men do a lot better if they have responsibilities. Because otherwise, without responsibilities are kind of an anchor, right?
Yeah.
You without that, then I can just do whatever I want. But the responsibilities actually like kind of keep you focused to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, I remember when I was in the Navy, like the best way I could be rewarded was if somebody said, "Okay, Brendan, you've done well here. Here's more responsibility.
Right.
Here, we trust you to go a little further
Yeah.
with this thing." That was always a fun feeling.
Yeah, and that's how men do really well. Men are really good at that, and I think that we don't always want to get away from responsibility. I think that that's the way people perceive things sometimes, but in most cases, I don't think that that's the case. I think if men feel honored by responsibility, in many cases, as you said, like like, oh, someone trusts me. I'm not a complete like fuck up. I can actually do things. They can trust me with things.
Right.
And then that becomes part of your identity.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I can get things done. And that makes you level up to the next level.
Yeah. So you have a lot of people who trust you now. You have a readership and everything. In a way, you're responsible to them, I think.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? When people contact you or people read your work, how do you navigate that?
Well, you can't let them tell you what to write, because then you're not being truthful. You can't just serve like, oh, what should I write today? And then write whatever people want you to write. What do I? Because that's very close to what should I say today. Yeah. And that's something that you don't want to do, because then you're not saying anything truthful. And I mean, whatever notoriety I have is because I ran my mouth and said exactly what I wanted to say. Yeah. So whether it gets me in trouble or not, like I've said what I believed at the time. Yeah. And that is a responsibility I think you have as an author or a public figure or any kind of leader, is to really do what you believe is right, and then admit it and explain why you changed your mind if you change your mind. A lot of people will just pivot and like, that didn't happen. And I think it's more responsible to say, well, no, I said that, you're right. And then I changed my mind because of X, Y, and Z. And now I feel I have a wiser perspective. And people will criticize you for that. Like, oh, well, you flip-flopped, like you changed your viewpoint. But if you haven't learned anything, you don't change your viewpoint, like, what are you doing? Like if you haven't been like, tried something and be like, well, that was a bad idea. You have to do that to learn. That's how we learn. Like, whoa, fire's hot. Like you don't do that anymore. And here's why. I can tell you why. Fire, burn your hand. You have the experience that you can communicate with other people. And so that's important to do that and be honest and share that experience with people. But it's also, as you're putting messages out there as an author, when no one knows you or cares what you think, you can say any damn thing. Like that. People, all these anonymous guys, just run their mouths and they're like, they can say anything because they don't have any responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
But I have the responsibility. I'm not responsible for other men's actions. Okay, I said something, so therefore you interpret it in your mind and then did something stupid. I mean, you can't hold people accountable for that. You could, because people read the Bible and go do something stupid. It happens all the time. Any book, anything.
Sure.
But I do try to be careful not to encourage lots of people to do something stupid.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel I have a responsibility that people might actually listen to me now, so I can't just run my mouth. And I have to be careful. Like, well, if I say this, they might do it. Mm-hmm. So I need to be careful about what I say, which is unfortunate because it makes you a little more reserved and careful in your language and whatever. But which is not as spicy and not as fun. But also, I can't have a whole bunch of guys go do something dumb. Mm-hmm. And have it be on my watch that I said it was a great idea. Mm-hmm. So you've lived long enough. You have times where I wish I wouldn't have told him to do that, or whether it's a friend or people who follow you or whatever. That was a bad idea. Mm-hmm. Sorry, But you just have to, like I said, learn from those mistakes and own up to them, and take responsibility for those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been 10 years since The Way of Men. Mm-hmm. Now there's this audience. A lot has changed in terms of, like you said, being more aware of what we say, that people are more quick to take sound bites and say, oh, somebody said this, take it out of context. What do you see ahead for the next 10 years? Do you think that this is an uptrend that will continue? Do you think we'll need to be more cautious with what we say?
Well, everything we say is tracked
mm-hmm.
now, in almost every way. If our phones are on, it's tracked. Everything's being tracked in some kind of way. Whether it's no one's actually sitting there listening to it because no one cares about 90% of the people in the world, what they say or what they do.
Sure.
But if the eye of Sauron comes down on you, then it's not always fair who it picks. Yeah. So just a bad thing can happen. You see it all the time. People happen. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time, or they were in a car accident, or they they were the family member of someone who did something bad, and all of a sudden, media spotlight comes down on them, and everything they say or do matters, and they're not prepared for that at all.
Right.
And that's going to happen. That's going to keep happening. But I do think that there's a real pushback that's been happening for a few years about the idea that that we should judge the past by the standards of Twitter, whatever's trending on Twitter. Mm-hmm. This kind of fluctuating morality that just comes from wherever, because you can't judge the past based on it. You can't judge men of the past based on things that they just came up with yesterday. That's not really fair. Mm-hmm. And then there's also the idea of judging each one of us by every single thing that we've ever said. And I think people are becoming a little bit more aware of how many things are just a cynical game. Mm. Because that's what a lot of that is. If you're going to be the people who are just constantly offended by anything that you say, they're really actually just looking for a target. They're not even actually offended a lot of times. Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, well, we're playing a game right now, and you just showed me a vulnerability that I'm going to exploit. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of people do see that now. I think a lot of people used to attribute that to they give people the benefit of the doubt, mm-hmm. that they're trying to do something good and they're sincere. Mm-hmm. But I think what we see more and more and more is that there's just gamesmanship happening, mm-hmm.
between
two sides, between different ideologies and different people. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people playing a game. Like I said, with Twitter, which I think has been one of the worst things that's happened to society in the world. But it's this idea that you have to, take down someone bigger than you by, seeking them out and to make a name for yourself. Mm-hmm. You have to be negative to make a name for yourself. Mm-hmm. That's a big thing. And people do it on YouTube too. There's if you become a public figure, there's going to be 10 guys with channels just talking about you.
Right.
And that's unfortunate. But I think that people are seeing, more and more, or at least I hope so, how cynical that is. Mm-hmm. Those guys are just looking to fill airtime. Mm-hmm. like they need something, they need raw meat, and they're going to look for it. That doesn't mean that guy did anything wrong, or that he wasn't sincere, or that he was doing something that you can put words in his mouth or whatever. I think that people are a little bit more aware of that, or I hope they are.
Yeah. So last time we talked, you were off Twitter. Now you're back on Twitter.
Well, no, I never got. I wasn't on Twitter. I just didn't have a Twitter.
Okay.
And then I think I had one maybe in like whatever 2016 for a minute, but I wasn't on Twitter for a long time. And when Elon Musk said he was going to buy it, I was like, well, let's see.
Okay.
So but I really hate it, and it's because of that function of it. It's like, well, okay, well, if I really wanted to make this work, I need to go find some celebrity and say something pithy, like do a little clap back and like, oh, other people like it, and pop popcorn, and here you go. I mean, that's a really undignified culture. I don't want to participate in that.
Yeah.
So I doubt that'll ever blow up for me. It's just, I think, like I said, doing less of that is better.
Yeah. Also, looking ahead, is there a new topic that you think you'll be writing about more in the future, something that appeals to you?
Well, I just think with Fire in the Dark, I really created something that I can work with endlessly.
Okay.
Because you're talking about all the mythology in the world and going through that and exploring that. And I want to make a lot more art personally. Like I've had my iPad out and been doing renderings. I'm like, there's no good drawings of Indra.
What is Indra?
Indra is the Vedic storm god.
Okay.
He's basically the Vedic Zeus or Thor or whatever.
Yeah.
So he throws lightning and kills dragons, whatever. And he's awesome. And there are very few renderings of him. I'm like, well, I want to bring more of those into the world. And this idea of the Striker, the Lord of the Earth, whatever. Well, what do they look like? And let's play with those ideas and explore them and create a new culture kind of based on that. Could you have music that was masculine, that was more positive than we get? Sugar pop and angry.
Yeah.
For years you had groups of men singing like war songs, but they were just like angry adolescent war songs. They were like actually like war. There's just more to culture, I think, that needs to be built out from there. So I think for me, it's really building that culture. For the philosophy that I call solar idealism, building that out and seeing there's so much potential. There's this great well of all of human history, and like I said, rather than putting on Renaissance fair outfits and like trying to recreate it, how do you take that and be like, this idea, the idea of the striker, and what that is? What is what is a warrior? What is the ultimate? What is the warrior beyond warrior? What does that mean? And what does that look like? What does that look like in 2,000 years? Imagine that. And that the well of that is endless. So I would like to focus more on that, for the rest of my life, I think. And so,
really?
I'm building a small organization now of guys. A lot of them are artists and musicians and so forth, and they're making some music inspired by that, and putting that out of the culture and actually shaping culture is where I want to put my energy now, creating this kind of a new solar culture.
Yeah. How do you shape culture? It seems such a big thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't shape like the whole world's culture because that is a big thing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. There are not a lot of new ideas in the world, and I'm kind of good at that. I'm good at seeing things a little early.
Well, the way of men is.
Yeah, it was a little ahead of its time.
It was calling for what we see now.
Yeah, and that's that's a blessing and a curse. Prophets don't usually do well historically,
Right?
But it is, if I can put some ideas out there and start balls rolling, you never know what that turns into. So put an idea of like some of these archetypes and get guys actually thinking about that and envisioning what that looks like. And create something new rather than trying to recapture an old thing. And so, like I said, there's endless well of creativity there. So if I can, kind of steer it, I just steer it, because any kind of cultural change, you actually have tons and tons and tons of people making it. And so if I can kind of spark that and kind of steer it to make sure it doesn't turn into like woo, Satanism. Like, or like turn it into something dumb. Like turn into something dark or stupid or whatever. And if I can keep it going in the right direction for a while,
Right.
hopefully it will take off on its own, or just become a thing in a way that like I like Italian futurism. Like that was I did a reading of their manifesto
Yes.
online. It's fantastic. It's just a fantastic manifesto, and to have something, a moment in the world, and then that affect other things. That's the way culture works a lot of times. You'll have people who sometimes die in poverty, will put together an idea, and then other people will run with it. And so this person who maybe doesn't even get credit for it started a ball rolling in a certain direction, and then it goes, off into all kinds of cool ways. And I would like to actually be remembered for it, and not be the guy who dies penniless. But it's if I can do that and put ideas out there and inspire people, well, that's really exciting to me.
So it seems now it's as much you as a creator as you as a leader of creators, would you say?
Yeah. I mean, or the guy who inspires them or whatever. I'll just put ideas out there and help push people in the right direction. I mean, that's I'm an older guy at this point. Like let's get to the point where you're kind of mentoring people and helping them move in a positive direction.
Yeah. Did you have mentors as a writer or as a thinker?
I've had mentors in different ways, and I think that as time has gone on, more in my adult life, you remember things from school or whatever, like like everybody does. Like they have good memories from school or from art school. I can remember the names of some of my art teachers. So I'm like, that's why I still know about composition. But and like, because he made me do that thing. There's certain little things like that. But then my mentors end up at this point being the men around me who inspire me. And that's we all want to be that guy, and also have those guys around us. And so, like I said, getting a message from Kasky and seeing him like produce so much content and just go crazy. And like I was talking to Bedros Keuilian the other day, and he's here's another guy who just like has done amazing things that I can't even imagine. If you can just take a little piece of that and a little piece of that, and look at what like Ryan Michler has done, and I mean, these are all guys who I've met, and so like I have some relationship with them, so they aren't like mentoring me on a like one-to-one basis, but I know them, and I get to see what they do, and then I can kind of adjust my course accordingly. And so like that's how a lot of, I think, lead by example kind of mentorship works. I haven't had anyone work with me personally on certain things, but I've surrounded myself over the years. Like I remember I used to work with this power lifter who was pretty well known, and he I learned a lot from him. Like I was kind of like his sidekick for a little while, and so being around guys who are doing a thing is very exciting. And so I think that's kind of how that's happened for me. And so if you can pull people into your orbit and be the guy who's doing a thing, and they can feed off that, you kind of become a mentor in that way.
Yeah. Well, Jack, before I ask my last question, for people who want to see where all that is going for you,
right,
where should they look for you online?
My Instagram is @StartTheWorld, and my Twitter, for however long it lasts, is at PH2T3R, because Jack Donovan was taken. And my website is jack-donovan.com.
Great. We'll put links to all that in the description for everybody who wants to check it out, and of course some of the books and other projects that we've talked about as well.
Yes.
Jack, my last question is, you've seen 10 years of The Way of Men. What do you think the next 10 years could be for The Way of Men? For
The Way of Men? I still feel like it's good. I went through last year, I sat down and wrote a new afterword for the hardcover edition of it, for the 10th anniversary hardcover. And I sat down and read it again, and I'm like, wow, that had a lot of footnotes, because I had to reformat. I do way too much myself, and so I reformatted it all in InDesign myself, and did all that. So I'm like, that's a lot of citations, man. I worked hard on that. And so I went through that, and I'm like, that is definitely one thing. And I've written things that I've, years later, I'd be like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have said that, right? That wasn't the right thing. But The Way of Men, no, I'm comfortable with that. Like, I was right. So there's a few things when I wrote the afterword, I thought, well, I would say stuff differently now, because, I was just a delivery truck driver when I wrote that book. So I was a delivery truck driver, and I was, going through drug tests and, like all the stuff that regular working guys have to do. That's kind of degrading and like, yeah, like and punching time clocks and doing that whole thing.
Yeah.
And so I was, angry delivery guy. And so like there's some language in there that would probably, as like, a guy who isn't in that situation, I'd be a little bit more measured. But beyond that, I mean, like the concept of masculinity and stuff is still foundational for everything I talk about now.
Yeah.
So really Fire in the Dark was built off of The Way of Men because it still follows from it.
Yeah.
And so hopefully men will keep sharing that because it's meant for all men, even men who don't like me. Like a lot of Christian guys. I'm not a Christian. I have a lot of Christian readers who like they don't like me. They look me up and they're like, I don't like that guy, but I'm still right. I'm still the stuff that's in The Way of Men is still right, and you can still use it. So.
Well, Jack, thank you for having the courage to write it and to share it and to spend your valuable time with me here in Hollywood of all places. I really appreciate it.
All right, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for watching this episode with Jack Donovan. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe.